你们好. Hello everyone. How are you? This time I want to take you on a virtual walk in a French concession area in Shanghai. This footage was taken in mid-April again. I hope you don't mind. It's still of late for us to keep up with the actions of today's Shanghai. Just now we saw two girls hand in hand. Supposing that they are engaged in a homosexual relationship, I would say it's not weird to see girls of that type these days. They are mostly young girls, and they can be found in any big or small city across. This is a fact, but this alone doesn't suffice to say that people are very open towards gays and lesbians. Most of them keep minimally low profile in public. What we're seeing right now is the most famous spot in the French Concession. If you have been to Shanghai, I'm pretty sure you've been here. Xingtiandi is the name of the place. There are three characters involved here. Xing means new. Tian and Di respectively mean heaven and earth. The new heaven and earth. The best term to define this place is the showpiece in the French Concession of Shanghai. It used to be a residential neighborhood. In 1990s, a Hong Kong company authorized by the government bought the properties from the local inhabitants. After some 2,300 houses, with some 8,000 people moved out of this neighborhood. The company raised some buildings and houses, of course, and then gave the place a facelift into what it looks like today. Later, I will walk into a living neighborhood where people still live to give you an idea of what this place originally might look like. This gorgeous standing building on the left was probably once inhabited by a tycoon. In the colonial era of Shanghai, that is between 1840s and 1940s for about 100 years, many private mansions like the one you just saw were built in the neighborhoods where his employees also lived around in this kind of localized townhouses in a row. The Chinese name for this kind of house is Shi Ku Men, or in Shanghai dialect, Sakumeng. Shi Ku Men literally means stone-framed gate, which is the main entrance to a house. Usually one family lives in a 3-story house. The first floor has the stone-framed gate, the front entrance. Once you step across the entrance, there's the open-top patio. And right now you are seeing the stone-framed gates on the right side here. There is also a sitting room and a kitchen and a back door in the first floor. Up on the second or the third floors, you've got big and small bedrooms and a balcony. For all those years, living in a Shikumen house in Shanghai, in French Concession of Shanghai in particular, was a symbol of upper well-being and status. Shikumen, the gate, together with the style of the house here, are the architectural signature of Xingtiandi. There are 3 auspicious deities in fusion style of West and East, modern and ancient. Therefore, fortune, prosperity, and longevity. Xintiandi has always been the hot spot in Shanghai, very popular with foreign expatriates and foreign visitors to Shanghai. But we don't see many now. Actually, there are just far and few between on this Sunday lunchtime. Since the outbreak of the COVID in early 2020 and the following draconian and lunatic zero COVID regulations, I just don't see any reason for the freedom and the ration-natured Westerners in particular to still live around in this city. One year ago, between March and April for 3 months, 24 million people in this city were locked down and up in their home and neighborhoods. There were padlocks on the gates of the neighborhood, sheet irons erected along the streets in front of the storefronts, roadblocks everywhere, layered inspections for health code, tracking code, and vaccination code. People couldn't do regular shopping. Food was handed out by government. A lot of people starved and got sicker and even dead for not being able to go to hospital. COVID testing was conducted every day for the sake of testing. Of course, the reason behind was the captain's call of zero COVID. You know what? Let's be honest with ourselves. People really lived like a pariah. And furthermore, after all that, most people, I'm talking about the majority, are either indifferent or still thankful for the little mercies from up there. It's helpful indeed to brush upon where this country has come from. Over 2,000-year domestic imperialism, the so-called 100-year humiliation, and then the communism to date. Talk of the devil and he will appear. This is the key spot with importance that cannot be exaggerated. Oh, by the way, this security guard told me not to enter with my gimbal. You know what? This is the birthplace of the Communist Party of China. 1921 is when it happened. Here in one of the houses in Shikumen block. Yes, this is a pretty good angle for you to see how the Shikumen houses and the frontal gates, the Shikumen itself, are laid out. Not long after the Russian October Revolution in 1917, when the violent and radical Bolshevik overpowered the mild Menshevik, in the wake of the demise of the last Tsar, communism that seemed very hopeful, or even some of the present-day democracies, swiftly spirited away from Russia to China. Another nation with the tradition for her people to both crave for and stoop to the power. Like Russia in history, China has had enough serfs. However, this is a borrowed term from Russian, who work exceedingly hard, but think little beyond eking out a life for themselves. Okay, before I drift away too far, let's still come back to talk about the site we just saw, the first meeting of the Communist Party of China. I just now said the first meeting was held in 1921. In 1911, Chinese and the world worked wonders to overthrow the last dynasty, the Qing dynasty, among a score of other big or small dynasties that constituted the so-called feudal history of China. The reason I put stress also on the world who contributed to the collapse of the last dynasty was because without all the wars waged by the foreign powers to deal the deadly blows over the Qing regime one after another, it would have been unimaginable for the Chinese alone to do the work. The foreign powers I mentioned here refer to the British, the French, the Japanese, the Russians, the Americans, and the Germans. However, it would be too naive to say that the foreign powers came extra miles to China to help liberate Chinese people. But objectively and undeniably, they did help with the Republic cause for the Chinese. Some came mainly for trade and business, primarily based on deals, therefore more constructive, like the British, the French, and the Americans. And some others came mainly for looting the resources and taking the territory, hence more destructive. The Russians, the Japanese, and Germans were kind of in that group. In that background, the British and the French each got their plot in Shanghai to develop their business and cultural sphere respectively. Today, the former British settlement in Shanghai is the most prosperous area for commerce and business. Instances on point are the Bund on the waterfront, kind of regarded as the Wall Street in Shanghai, and the east and west Nanjing roads, with the eastern parts boasting of the so-called number one shopping street in China, and the People's Square that was once the horse race track for the British and today's municipal center of the city. Different from the British settlement, the French concession, where the French in old days enjoyed the extraterritoriality, was developed and expanded into desirable living quarters in the countryside to cater for the well-doing foreign expatriates engaged in trade and business, and the local upstarts and upper-class people. Today, for Shanghainese, in thinking of the French concession area, the word that comes up in their mind is upscale or classy. Excuse me, maybe I have digressed again, but let's talk about it. The first Congress was held here in 1921 in secret form, because then China was republic. It was dangerous for those communists to gather. 13 Chinese plus 2 Russians managed to convene there in the house. In the French concession, where they obviously considered much safer. Nevertheless, the news broke somehow, and their house was searched, and a meeting was interrupted. As luck would have it, they managed to escape in the nick of time. Needless to enumerate the list of the attendees of the meeting, let me just tell you one name. That would be enough. Mao Zedong is how we pronounce in Chinese with intonations. What is on my left side is a neighborhood that has been expropriated. I'm pretty sure 3 years ago this neighborhood was still alive and kicking. Have you noted that I have just left the Xintiandi, the showpiece in the French concession, with bistros and high-end shops where the Communist Party of China held the first meeting? I'm now still walking within just 1 block away from Xintiandi. People in the neighborhood on the left were not relocated until recently. Well, that happened 30 years after the original residents in Xintiandi compound moved out. As the relocated residents in Shanghai today complain about the minimal compensation they receive from the eminent domain, those whose properties were expropriated 20 or even 30 years ago have long hit pay dirt. In the past 30-some years, since the reform and opening up and the ensuing integration with the outside world, Chinese economy has been put into overdrive. Across all the big cities in this country, like Shanghai alone, on the single account of eminent domain, hundreds of thousands of families in Shanghai have metamorphosized from workers in collectivism to now landowners with multiple apartments on average. However, don't take the land part in the word landowner just literally, as every piece of land is actually owned by the state or the party. Apartment owners, whether you pay to get or you get through eminent domain, possess only the right to use the land for 70 years, according to the current law, which people only pretend to decide on in the process of otherwise lawmaking. Anyway, this is the treatment only people in cities in China can get. What about the people in the vast rural area? In China, there's the hukou system, the household registration. People upon birth are divided into citizens in a city or farmers in a country, simply based on the status of their parents. A citizen hukou holder automatically enjoys a whole bunch of different social benefits from his or her farmer counterpart. Although they are both Chinese nationals, and perhaps a latter is more worthy of something than a prior from the perspective of human character. No matter how many people don't think that way or don't want to believe so, both within and outside China, or if you want to use the substantial development as the proof positive, I think in terms of software or way of thinking, China is still a backward, medieval society. Due to the information manipulation, the silent majority, and the Janus-based practice, that last one in other words means to a personal beneficial end, not telling the truth is okay. Something the populace in an authoritarian system are immersed with, unless one tries really hard to break away. By the silent majority, I mean, there are two facets. The farmers in one group, because of the lack of education and excessive workload, don't have the ability or desire to think anything beyond living. While the city people, they have access to any education, plenty of opportunities, social benefits without working nearly as hard as their rural fellows, plus one apartment or two per family. That befalls just like a windfall. In such a privileged hygge, what is the spot of bother for the mass to be critically verbal? To conclude my personal observation on this current subject, for farmers in the country, the bare boom of their life is work and work. They are either uninformed or ill-informed. If asked about their political outlook, some are literally ignorant or indifferent. But those who do have a view, they would rave their personal cult of Mao and how the United States has it in for their country. Whereas to city folks, the meat and potatoes of their life are work, pension, hyper-consumerism. There's possibly a small uninformed percentage But the majority, as I see, is either ill-informed or misinformed. There is also a good amount of mouse admiration, more in the older generation to say the least, than in the younger generation. They seem to hold strong belief in omnipotence of the Communist Party, something that they can rely on without fail in both the domestic agenda and international affairs. The United States is viewed as a hegemonic democracy. They kind of call the utility of democracy into questions, seeing democracy as not as efficient, and the freedom alongside which they think is too much is the hotbed of crimes. They think the US is not safe for its gun violence, drugs, and racial discrimination, which they are often exposed to on media. There are two figures I want to provide, which I think well suggests the disparity of Chinese society, roughly between the cities and the villages. I think sometime in 2020, it was let out of the mouth of then Premier that 700 million Chinese make something less than $160 a month. That is about $13 a month. By contradistinction, the minimum wage in Shanghai these years hovers something around close to $400 a month, while its average salary is double that number. Another number I read just a few days ago, which I also noticed that didn't stay very long on the media outlets, says about 900 million Chinese have never taken an airplane. Alright, let's talk about the neighborhoods you are seeing. In Shanghai, people refer to this kind of old, Western-tinged neighborhoods in three different terms. Stone-framed gate Shikumen is the one I mentioned earlier. Linong, alleyway community, is another. And Nongtang, alleys. I just now mentioned the three names in a gradient order, from classy to neutral and to plain. With the location factored in, I would doubtless put this neighborhood into the classy. Shikumen houses were first seen in Shanghai around 1850s in late Qing dynasty, after the British knocked the door of the fossilized Chinese society open, and shortly after the French, following the British, established its settlement called the French Concession in Shanghai. That time, the opening of the Chinese society was achieved through wars, respectively the First Sino-British War, also known as the Opium War, and the Sino-French War. Upon mentioning the word opening, I can't help but associate with the ongoing, which I'm not so sure, better say recent, reform and opening up that began after the passing of Chairman Mao that made the end of the soon following Cultural Revolution possible in 1978. Most of the existing Shikumen neighborhoods were built around 1920s, 1930s, and early 1940s, known as the Golden Age of Shanghai in old days. Yes, you know what? When you walk around in Shanghai downtown seeing anything Western and classical, the go-to answer is that it was probably built around 1930 something. In 1945, the Second World War for Chinese part, the anti-Japanese war, was over. What lied ahead, in hindsight, was the Civil War and the takeover by the Communists. In 1949, the last breath of the golden age glory of the city was gone in the wind. In Mao's era, it took no prize to guess everything was public. It took no exception to all the Western classical mansions, apartments, buildings, and neighborhoods in the French Concession. Those properties left waifs by exodus were soon allocated by the party. To people and organs, they assessed worth into grades. This plaque says this Pebble Dash neighborhood was built by a foreign firm in the year 1919. The building ahead on the left, standing at the street corner, is a classical condominium built in 1931. It's about 15 to 1 p.m. To Chinese people, to have lunch at this time is very late. This elevated motorway is the north and south going artery that divides downtown into western and eastern halves. Now I'm taking you to see the green breathing space ahead. It's one of the most famous parks in the city today, and the most famous westernized park in downtown. The most evident change from my last visit here is that the bounding fence has been torn down. This is Fuxing Park. Fuxing means Renaissance. Again, let me remind you that this visit was made in the middle of April. By now, that tree, I believe, is leafy. This street right in front of the main entrance of Fuxing Park is called Fuxing Road. In colonial days, it was called Rue Lafayette. Look, this is a 4-star park and a Shanghai civilized park. I wonder why this park is not a 5-star. I also wonder aloud why civilized matters to a park. Do we also have to go extra miles to pronounce it an open park, a public park, a nice park, a clean park, so on and so forth? And hold on a minute. By what can you say a park is civilized? Is it because there have been more civilized people to this park than not? Or is it a reminder for the visitors to behave? Perhaps I have blabbered a bit too much on this petty subject. Actually, as a Chinese, we are quite familiar with the notion civility. There are public posters here and there reminding people of being civil. And civility is one of the 12 new socialist values directed by President Xi. Plus the fact that there are urban management officers across cities in China, known as Chengguan. They usually roam around in streets to make sure things are in order, by ordinance, and in good image. In other words, they are partially responsible for the civilized look of a city. This lawn is cordoned off for the seasonal keeping. On seeing this, my episodic memory called me to a young man sitting in the bench right here on the left, just a few years ago. Looking distraught, he held 4 cigarettes between 2 fingers, thrusted them to the mouth, smoked deeply all at once, and puffed the loops with gusto. This park was built in French style in 1909, with the Chinese Bai garden that you're looking at over there. This park is usually busy with a lot of people doing activities, just like many other parks in China. Dancing, singing, and playing musical instruments are what you usually get to see. I guess it's tranquil now not because it's a civilized park. I saw those activities in loud music many times in this park. The reason might be it's still lunchtime, and there's ongoing maintenance work in the main parterre at the center of the park. A lot of azalea and a platan, the sycamore tree. Around this time of the year, the new leaves of the sycamore are growing. In the same time, there are catkins drift about, making the passers-by sneeze. Near inside the entrance of the park, we saw a lady sweeping the ground, with piles of the flossy catkin her broom collected. There is no off-limit sign or cordon. As I'm about to enter the space of the parterre, one man told me to stay out. The center of this space is a fountain. There is a statue of 2 men behind this water fountain. These 2 men changed the course of the near-modern history of China theoretically. They are held in high esteem by Chinese bureaucrats. They stand in camaraderie. Do you know who they are? I remember a number of years ago, probably like 10 years ago, there were some entertainment facilities inside this park. There was a big karaoke center, a nightclub, and an exclusive speakeasy Chinese food restaurant. But soon after the current Chinese leader Xi Jinping came into power in the year 2012, those establishments were closed, as they were seen unfit for this civilized park. In a campaign of austere and sumptuary practice for the Communist Party members. As the saying goes, a new broom sweeps clean. This is especially true in China. This is a trellis yard. This place is interesting. I call it the Speaker's Corner. I used to see here large crowds, especially on weekends, conversing with each other a wide range of social topics, some of which are really sensitive and are things you don't normally get within the Chinese information feed. There are always some rather talkative and informative guys, each leading a group, their audience circled around in different postures. They are all Shanghai local residents, 65 years old up, as I guesstimate. This is a Monday. I don't see any speakers. I'm not sure if they are still here regularly, because my last time here was 3 years ago, again before the COVID. Anyways, even at that time, this was a place that made me wonder how they could be here, considering what they talked about in public. Some of them talked about the stock exchange, which was out of the question. Some spin against China with regard to the Sino-US relationship. That was still fine. But some of those who gave lowdowns of the Chinese state leaders were courageous. I also heard at times some guys name-call the party, kind of in and out, rather than in full blast, I would say. This Tai Chi exerciser looks Chinese and Western hybrid in his countenance. When I stroll around in a Chinese park here, I do see occasionally some Tai Chi practitioners. There are more of them in early morning, but I have difficulty in recollecting how many Kung Fu persons I've come across in public. Oh, Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan, two figures only, under the aegis of Hollywood, in the magic work of money, have successfully created a preconception that makes how many people fancy meeting a Kung Fu master at the drop of a hat in China. I'm narrating in the end of June now. I know it's darn hot in Shanghai. 40 degrees Celsius or 104 degrees Fahrenheit is none the stranger. I remember when I was a child, 38 degrees Celsius was considered an exceptionally hot day. But now the bar has been raised by 2 degrees higher. In much further northern metropolis, Beijing, the temperature on the street surface is over 60 degrees Celsius. I have read on news that Europe is in the same sticky wicket. There are eateries on the other side of the street. This restaurant is famous in Shanghai. Their feature is the yellow crocker fish soup noodles. Interesting portraits of famous scientists from both China and the world. This complex is Shanghai Science Auditorium. There is a grand French-style building. In old days, it was the sporting club for the French in Shanghai. A typical street in the shade of sycamore trees. Two more restaurants over there. One of them is another noodle restaurant. Shanghainese like their noodles. Some huge events have happened in the past years. Lessons have to be learned. This is a time calling for morality. This is the time for men to be more judgmental. Without the morality to keep up, more money and the technology, I'm afraid, only do the harm. I hope you have enjoyed this walking tour in the French Concession. I hope you have also picked up some helpful viewpoints from my personal observation of the Chinese society and more broadly the humanity. I'm now walking in one of the busiest commercial streets in the city. It's called Huaihai Road. This street is more upscale than the Nanjing Road streets I introduced to you on my previous tours. If Nanjing Road Street attracts more Chinese tourists and visitors from outside Shanghai, this one is more popular with local Shanghainese and young people. Every September, in the beginning of Shanghai Tourism Festival, this is the street seeing the float parade passing. It's quite interesting to see how many people wear a mask. I am one who tries not to wear a mask unless necessary. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. There will be more to come in different topics, different themes, different towns, different cities, different villages. I will try my best. Until next time, it's goodbye. Take care.